Alright, hi guys. So today, I guess what we'll start by doing is we'll start by just giving an overview of all of our topics. And I guess I'll start because I'm the first one talking. So my topic is the LA riots. This was a period between April 29th and May 4th that saw basically the worst rioting since 1863 in New York City. And during this time, it was caused by a man named Rodney King. What happened is that he was very heavily intoxicated, and he was driving around 120 on a 40. Not a good start. But he was pulled over by the cops after like a 7-mile police chase, and then he was beaten because they thought if he's intoxicated, he could really hurt us because he's not very verbally communicative. And there was a man recording him. That recording was sent to everybody, at every news station. Fast forward a year later, there was a trial for the 4 cops. The 4 cops were acquitted, and that's when the LA riots really sparked. It was a time of a lot of struggle because there's one example of it. A girl's name was Reginald Denny, and while listening to country music, driving his truck, or her truck, she was pulled out of her car, and she was heavily beaten, and unfortunately passed away. And there were a lot of stories about that, but that one really stuck out to me personally. In the aftermath of these riots, there were around 16,000 arrests. About 54 people were killed. A lot of people were killed, and there were around $1 billion in property damage. And around a year after that, Rodney King had charged 2 of the 4 officers with violating his constitutional rights. They were sent to 2 years in prison. Rodney King was granted $3.8 million in damages. And if you guys have any questions, that's about the overview of my topic. Now for the video. So the video is basically a 22-minute newscast from the day about Rodney King. The Rodney King riots. That's what they called it back in the day, the Rodney King riots. And in the video, you saw a lot of looting. You saw there was a burning of a police station. There were 5 fires reported during that newscast alone. It was just a 22-minute newscast. And yeah, it was a very powerful video. And if you guys have any other questions about it, go for it, yeah. But that's pretty much everything that has to do with that. Would you like to,
Me?
Yeah, would you like to say your piece, John?
Alright, so my topic was about Hank Aaron and his 715th home run. For those of you who don't know, Babe Ruth's record for career home runs was 714, and Hank Aaron, a black man in the deep south of America, was able to beat his record with his 715th on April 15th, I believe, and I know the year is 1974, and up to that date, he was given death threats for going after the record of the Babe, and
Death threats?
yeah, he was given death threats. He was slanders, and he had to go through all sorts of racist taunts before he was able to finally beat the record and show that he earned it himself. And throughout his career, he was born in Mobile, Alabama, and he grew up with the game of baseball, playing for a semi-pro team, then to the Negro Leagues, and from there he was able to show major league organizations what he could do, and he got into the major leagues with the Boston Braves, which then moved to Milwaukee, where he made his major league debut. He broke many records and will go down as one of the greatest of all time. And of course, his long-standing 755 career home runs is still standing today, although it was broken by Barry Bonds. It's not
Barry Bonds.
Not really,
Barry
not
Bonds
really
is very reliable.
considered to be real due to some steroids being used. But yeah, that's
interesting. Was there any signs of racial abuse when he was younger? Or I assume there was.
Yes, he was growing up in the deep south where Jim Crow laws really dominated
Okay.
the government.
Makes sense. All right. JJ, would you like to go?
Yeah, sure. So my topic was on Mildred and Richard Loving. So, okay, so a brief thing about them. So They both grew up in Caroline County, Virginia. And Virginia, back during the civil rights era, was a generally segregated place. But in Caroline County, it was very mixed. And Mildred was mixed race, and Richard was white. And as they both lived in Caroline County, and Richard was friends with Mildred's brother. So as they grew older, they fell in love, and when Mildred was pregnant, they wanted to get married. But there was a problem because Virginia was currently practicing a law called the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. So it said that act stated two things: that couples of different races cannot get married, but it also made rules. It made rules for it. So they followed the one drop rule. So if someone had one drop of colored blood, which is basically like non-white blood, they would be considered colored. And Mildred was mixed race, so in the eyes of the Virginia government, she was considered colored, and Richard, with 100% European ancestry, was considered white, so they are not allowed to get married in Virginia. So they decided to go to Washington, D.C., which was only 80 miles away, where interracial marriage was legal. So they went there, then they went directly back to Virginia. However, from an anonymous source, they were told on by someone to the sheriff, who got a bunch of policemen to their house, and then they got arrested. And then the judge, he gave them two options. So they were obviously found guilty because it was against the law, but he said they could either leave Virginia for 25 years or go to prison. They chose Virginia. However, so they went to Washington, D.C. because it was generally close. But the problem was Mildred really hated Washington, D.C. because of city life, so they decided to they decided to get their case heard again from the judge. And when he re-ruled that it was illegal, they then sued the Virginia Supreme Court. They said it was still illegal. So then they sued to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sided with them. So because of that, they were allowed to go back to Virginia, and it also made all racial laws that regarded marriage illegal, which included 16 practicing states.
Okay. That was a long, but it's a good one. So they were an interracial couple, and they just couldn't get married. And what time period was this?
This was the civil rights era, so
like the 60s.
Yeah, this is late 50s to a good amount of 60s, because their case got heard in 1960s.
Do you know if it's before the Civil Rights Bill was passed or not, or do you not remember?
I don't know specifically, but their fight was around the time it was in the Civil Rights era.
I'm just saying that because if that was passed by the Supreme Court, that might have had something to do with the Civil Rights Bill being passed.
Oh yeah, of course.
You said Caroline County was integrated county?
Yeah, it was integrated, which was very unusual for Virginia, especially.
All right, would you like to go?
Yeah, so I basically had a picture of William Frantz Elementary School. Previously, up until the 1960s, southern states especially had segregated schools. However, with the coming of the 1960s, they finally had public schools must be integrated legally. So basically, they started integrating them. However, a lot of people, especially in southern states, were extremely mad about this. There were riots, and when these students would go to school, they would get a lot of racial hate, including William Frantz Elementary School. It's most famous for its student Ruby Bridges, who was the only black student. She was 6 years old, and she passed a test that said she could go to a previously all-white school. And one day, court marshals showed up at her door and took her to school, and as they drove, she was surrounded by an angry white mob yelling racial slurs at her and a bunch of violent things to this little girl. She remembers being really, really scared. Throughout the year, only one teacher taught her in an empty classroom because no one else was willing to. A lot of people started to pull their children out of school because of this. There were other people around the same time period. There were these three girls that went to a different school called McDonough. They also faced a lot of prejudice. They also had marshals show them to school and angry white mobs, but they had their classroom and they were told that they couldn't play outside at recess or eat in the same lunchroom, and they were put underneath the stairwell instead.
Could they not do it because it's too dangerous, or is
No, because even though schools were being integrated, teachers still didn't like this,
okay.
and they still just told them to stay underneath the stairwell or not be included because of the support of a bunch of white parents at the school.
Okay.
This caused a lot of things because of a lot of white people were pulling their children out of school. This caused a lot of their funding and money to leave, and they went to private schools that could still segregate their schools technically because they're private. And so this caused a lot of generational trauma, because if these kids don't have enough funding for these public schools, then they don't have the same opportunities to go to college and get better and higher paying jobs.
Yeah.
So it leaves a really big generational impact overall.
Okay.
Did it
Four
get,
good topics. Four very good topics. I guess we can move on to like a question that I have for myself and all of you guys. So how did this topic further help your understanding of the civil rights movement? And I'm kind of saying that to myself because I'm probably gonna answer first. So for me personally, what I found really interesting was that I think this was really the first time that African Americans worked together with other minorities, because African Americans only made up around 45% of the people in the LA riots. Latinos made up around 50.6%. So it was a very mixed kind of revolt against the LAPD, which I found very interesting. Sean, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. I found it really interesting about how Hank Aaron. When I think of baseball, I was thinking like it's a game for everyone.
Yeah.
And everyone can play it. And when I was watching the videos of him hitting that home run, I thought it was just like a normal video, just like him reaching a milestone. Like it didn't matter all that much. But when I looked more into it, it was a big deal for a black man in the Deep South in Atlanta to beat the record of a idol that people look up to.
Yeah.
And people he was just through playing in the Deep South, becoming the face of baseball with his performances day in and day out, made him a very strong activist for the civil rights movement. And yeah.
You're a baseball fan, right?
Yeah.
That topic suited you then. Yeah. Alright, would you like to go, JJ?
Yeah, I guess mine showed how long it takes to see change, because Mildred and Richard got arrested in 1958, and the Supreme Court didn't make their ruling till the late 60s, so yeah.
That's interesting, yeah. Would you like to go?
Yeah, so for me, I guess it was just how much this is kind of how it lasted and went into the future, because I feel like while a lot of steps were made in the civil rights movement, especially in the 1960s, but it still didn't change a lot of people's opinions. Even with integrated schools and a lot of these laws being, put down or made to help protect a lot of different groups of people, it still didn't change a lot of the self-mythology of a lot of the people. There are still lots of white people that have these same type of ideas even today.
I think we've said everything that's needed to be said. Thank you guys for speaking
Okay.
to me.
Thank you.
And